Mayank recently wrote the exam and got a 715 score, which is a phenomenal score. I mean, if you look at the previous exam, it will be plus 55. That will make it 770. So this is his score report. As you can see, 715. And the highest score is in the data insights section. So first of all, congratulations. This is the first time we're interacting. We definitely exchange some texts.
I came across one of your workshops and I remember the questions set. I think you gave us 10 set of questions and I wasn't able to do even one of them. And I was like, okay, this is something different, definitely. And
All right.
they top 1% definitely knows what they're doing. So I enrolled in the program. By the time the live batch ended, I was at a point where I could solve RCs within the limited within the time frame, recommended time frame, with
Mhm.
the accuracy around 100% and all that. However, I didn't listen to one piece of advice that you consistently gave, which was to be consistent, right? And
Okay.
I had one target in mind. I want to clear GMAT. This is the best time that is possible because I have a break right now. My next project won't start till mid of March, so I have to, give my GMAT uh, by end of March or mid March. So
Right.
I went through the guidelines that you guys had shared, like after all the
Mhm.
classes ended, right? I remember there was this page,
Mhm.
and the first step was after doing all the classes, after
Mhm.
doing all the pre-work, which I had done, right,
Mhm.
very thoroughly. I had to give a diagnostic mock. I
Mhm.
had 1.5 months for preparation, and I made a plan, right? And then I cross checked with the plan that you guys had given to us.
Mhm.
And I made sure, I stick to only the material that top 1% had made.
Mhm.
I didn't want to, go to, GMAT club or
Right.
different sources, right? I didn't
Mhm.
want to do that. So, which I think again was one of, which is something that you had talked about earlier, right? So I
Mhm.
did that, and I'm glad again I followed that piece of advice. So one thing I would like to say is I sticked to top 1%'s material, whether it was, how to approach RCs, whether it was how to approach DI section, or whether it was which material to solve 700 to 800 level questions, or the
Mhm.
marathon sessions and everything, right? I gave 2 or 3 mocks,
Mhm.
in a short span. I understood that VR, verbal was my weak point, and DI. Both of
Mhm.
these were my weak point. DI was बहुत बुरा बहुत बुरा.
The GMAT DI section is very weird in this sense. Like
It
you have
is,
to
it
get
is.
all three correct or all four correct to get. That is where I think the biggest challenge happens, right? And especially you have to read very carefully. So yeah.
Right. DI was the completely different game because it was more of verbal than
Mhm.
maths
Yeah.
involved there. So that was very tricky for me, given that verbal was already a weaker section, right?
Mhm.
So again, I started making mistakes in RCs, and I was like shocked. Ki I used to have 100% accuracy. What is happening, right?
Mhm.
And then it struck me that I wasn't consistent. So I went back to the classes, did them all over again, went through my mistakes, and I started giving mocks again. My score increased from 645 to 675, 85, 95.
Mhm.
uh, However, I wasn't still getting the 700 mark, right?
Mhm.
I was desperate to see 700 score in my
Mhm.
on my mocks. In fact, it was exactly 1 week before, when I still hadn't seen a 700 plus score on my mock. So it was again the error log part of it. Like, so I used to give a mock, right? 2.5 hours of mock, and
Mhm.
then 2 to 2.5 hours of analyzing the mock, noting down the errors and everything. And I used to do it right after giving the mock, because otherwise, you might forget what you were thinking at the time you were
Mhm.
attempting the question and all that. And I didn't want to miss that, because
Okay.
it was bound to happen again, right?
Mhm.
So I did that, and then I used to make sure that I don't repeat my mistakes. That is, I think that was game changer for me. I came across this thought, which was, don't study till you get it right, study
Mhm.
till you can't get it wrong. And that
Mhm.
stuck with me, and I was like, okay, I need to follow this. So yeah, I made the error log. I maintained it very religiously. It was that I was making new mistakes every time,
Mhm.
right? And this was again all happening in the last week of my preparation. So yeah,
Mhm.
that was a bit weird to take. I was a bit anxious because of all that. And one day before, I didn't study anything. I just went there. The setup was something different. So there was a big screen, and I used to give my mocks on my laptop, and there the screen was above my eye level, so I was looking ऐसे ऊपर. But when I was giving my mocks, I was looking down. So I don't know if that made a difference or what, but it certainly played a part. At least that's what I believe. And
Mm-hmm.
first part I think was VR. So my order was verbal, DI, and then quant. After the verbal section, I knew ki I did make some mistakes. Usually in my mocks, in the last few mocks, I wasn't making any mistake in verbal. I was getting VR 100, but I
Was it
knew
because
some.
something was unusual or because of the setup or some anxiety or what was it like?
I think it was mix of anxiety of and the exam pressure, obviously, plus the setup was something different,
Mm-hmm.
right? The screen was far off, and I
Yeah,
had
it
to
happens. I mean,
bend.
so
Yeah,
that's like almost double the size, first of all. The screen size is huge, and you had to look up. That is a strange thing, was whenever I've written the exam or heard, maybe in your center particularly, it was like this. But in terms of question types or question level, anything super unusual or in verbal or nothing really?
nothing. Sandeep, it was quite similar to what
Hmm.
I was used to by then,
Right, right.
going through all the materials and everything. So
Hmm.
one thing is that, we students, we come across a lot of materials. Maybe our one of our colleagues is preparing, so he or she might come and say, I'm going through this materials and my scores increased from this to this. You must check it out and all that. But I think at the end of the day, that just confuses you. And I
Hmm.
had full faith in top 1%'s,
Right,
material. So I never felt the need to do that.
right. Tell us about the other sections also. How was the DI section? How was the quant section? Yeah.
Yeah. So for DI, I think this was the game changer section for me. Like after VR, I took my break, and I knew I didn't do very well. So I tried to calm myself. I was like, bro, you've done VR not that well, but
Hmm.
you know don't think about it, right? Because DI and quant, if you get 100, VR won't. I mean, the
Hmm.
mistakes that you made in VR, you might compensate that,
Right.
right? So my full focus went from VR bura kiya, VR bura kiya to DI अच्छा करना है, right?
Hmm.
So that's what I did. So went in for DI. So DI beginning, like when I gave my initial mock, it was the weakest of all the
Hmm.
three sections, right? Because not only it had verbal, but then also the part that you said, you have to get all three right, and
Hmm.
all of that, right? So it gets tricky, going back and forth to the passage, especially MSRs, right?
Right, yeah.
And it sometimes eats a lot of time, right? And then you
Mm-hmm.
get under pressure, and all of that happens. So again, what I did was I gave all the 9 sectional mocks, I think, that were
Mm-hmm.
available, and I
Right.
went through the marathon part of it. I did that,
Did you do all
and
the IR and DI sectional tests? Because a lot of them
yeah,
were provided. So you did those.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, all the sectional tests, and those were very, very helpful, Sandeep. I mean, I don't think so. If there's any other institute which provides sectional tests,
Yeah,
again, I
yeah, they
didn't
don't
search much
actually.
for that.
Yeah. And too many of them. I mean, we just have a huge collection because we know that section requires the highest amount of practice. So
Right.
yeah, shall tell me the experience of that section. Anything unusual once again? I always like to ask this because it's very reassuring for an future test taker that okay, questions are not fresh or something. Yeah, please tell.
Right. Again, I would say for each of the sections, I didn't find anything unusual. Nothing was unusual. It was the same thing. I think if in the practice sessions it was about, let's say, MSR was about cars or anything, then the
Mhm.
same thing in the exam was, let's say, about trucks or maybe doctors or something. I don't know, but exactly similar type of questions. They ask you to
Right.
find medians. You have to make sure you sort on both of the parameters that they have given. I had made that mistake a couple of times in my mocks, so I
Okay.
was aware
Okay.
of that. So one thing I used to do was, Sandeep, before my section used to begin, right? I used to write down my strategy on the whiteboard that they provide us,
Right.
right?
Right. Okay.
I think it just helps to solidify or remind yourself, because it's in the moment, right? You are anxious about the exam and all that.
Can you
So
elaborate? I did not probably follow. Probably many
right.
people also wouldn't follow. What is this whiteboard thing?
So basically, they give a whiteboard, right?
Right,
Sort of
they do.
before
Yes,
the
yes.
exam for the rough work, right?
Mm-hmm.
So before the starting of
Mm-hmm.
every section, what I used to do was I used to write down my strategies. So for
Okay.
example,
Mm-hmm.
DI may my strategy was for DS, make equations for each of the statements. I know, sometimes, a lot of times actually, it had happened with me before that I read one of the statements and I used to think, okay, based on intuition, my intuition, I used to take an option or something, right? But that backfired a lot of times, right? So I made sure I stick to the process that you guys
Mm-hmm.
have taught us, which is go one statement at a time, then combine them,
Mm-hmm.
no matter
Mm-hmm.
what, just make an equation, just write it down, right?
Right, right.
At least that's what helped me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I made sure I did that. And
Okay.
yeah, I think from one of my the worst section, right? I didn't used to score very well. I used to miss at least 5 questions in the beginning, right? To getting the highest from among the three
Yeah,
sections.
your DI percentile is the highest, and this is really, really phenomenal to see. And your quant would have been pretty usual once again, right? Not too much
Yeah,
trouble.
yeah, yeah.
Last 3 weeks, you would say, or 4 weeks were very intensive, right? Essentially, for you.
Last, yes, yes, absolutely, Sandeep. Last 4 or 5 weeks, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you describe your schedule while you were working at that, whether you were working at that time, whether you were free, how many hours you were studying last 5 weeks, let's say? Yeah.
Right. So my project has just ended. Actually, we were in the documentation stage of it, so there wasn't much work, so to say. But I used to leave my home at, I had this whole morning routine of going to gym and all that. I didn't leave that,
Mm-hmm.
so I stick to it. Went to my office, used to come back around 5 or 6 p.m. Right,
Mm-hmm.
and then used to have my dinner, went for a walk, and around 7:30 p.m. is when I used to sit down to study. And 5 hours of focus work I used to do. 12:30 tak I was
Oh,
all
that's
about
great.
studies.
Yeah. That's really, really
And
nice. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Mm.
yeah, I think again that was coming back from what you used to say.
Mm.
Every day, each day, we need to put in 3 hours, I think for 3 months or so. So
Right,
I
right.
figured although I have put in some amount of time, but I need to cover up for the inconsistency, right?
Mm-hmm.
My biggest regret would be the inconsistency. Had I been consistent enough, right? I don't think so. A higher score was, beyond my reach. So that's my regret of not being consistent
Yeah.
enough. Yeah.
So that is one lesson. It's very clear. Be consistent. Any other thing, any other tips you will have now that you're on the other side?
These were the mistakes that I was witnessing in each of the sections. So it was a common theme of mistakes, right? So one was I wasn't reading full sentences, right? Maybe halfway through a con question, I just used to, think that I figured out what the question was. So I just used to start solving, only to later realize 1.5 minutes into solving the question that maybe the question didn't even want that. Or maybe
Mhm.
for RCs, what I used to do was I had four options, right? I used to read 4 or 5 or 6 words of the sentence, and I used to think, okay, that's what the sentence is saying, and I just used to tick my answer basis that. And a lot of times it happened that there was a keyword which either made the option wrong or right towards the end of it, right?
Mhm.
And so read full sentences was one of these themes of mistakes that were happening with me that I was
Mhm.
committing, right? Second was, in case a question seemed weird, or in case I'm not able to get the question, or in case I'm thinking ki, okay, they've given 6 conditions, but only four, I'm only able to use four, right? And I don't think so there's any use for the other two.
Mhm.
So what I used to do for such questions was, earlier I used to just tick my answer basis that, basis my understanding at that point of time. But later I realized I need to go back to the questions. I need to go back and review them once, just
Mhm.
so to make sure, because again a lot of times it happened that my initial understanding was wrong. There was a
Mhm.
keyword that I had missed, or maybe because in the process of reading and everything I skipped something, right, which was very
Right.
essential for those two conditions and all.
Mhm.
So in case a question seems weird, just make sure you go back to the question, you review it. Third mistake was putting too much time or spending too much time on a question. Again, it it doesn't matter, I think given the review section of it, if
Mm-hmm.
you have to use it to your advantage, my take was, don't spend too much time on a question. In case you're not able to figure it out by 2.5 minutes, just tick it and move to the next option, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just select your answer and go to the next option, because anyways you can review it back, right?
Right.
So that was there. And also it was that, sometimes I was spending a lot of time on one question, which used to end up in me being not able to attempt last 3 or 4 questions. So essentially it was a trade off between 1 or 4 questions, so it
Right.
was easy for me to choose, right? So that
Mm-hmm.
was there. And yeah, sometimes it used to happen that, let's say there's a graph given, right? For 4 years, each of the quarters they have given GDP growth, right? And they asked which quarter, or which year
Mm-hmm.
of which quarter was the one which witnessed the highest growth. So let's say I figured the answer is Q3 of fiscal year 24, right? But then
Mm-hmm.
when I used to, select it from the drop down, I just used to see, okay, Q3. And because I was in a hurry, right, I just used to select the first option which had Q3 in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that that was wrong, because it was essentially Q3 of fiscal year 22 which I had selected, but I wanted to select something else. So
All
again,
right.
yeah. So these were basically a theme of mistakes that I was making across
Mm-hmm.
the sections. So yeah.
So reading very carefully, one reading fully, and then maintaining an error log, because only then you can go back to correcting these. As I realize, error log also you can emphasize on it more if you want. And the last thing you are saying is that whenever you have something like this, just like be careful. Like don't mark
Right.
2022 or 2024. I mean this kind of a mistake. So
Right.
I gathered that careful reading, full reading, and maintaining that you don't spend too much time on one question, that is during the exam, and looking at your error logs very seriously. Probably these,
Absolutely.
right? Anything about
Absolutely.
error logs you would like to emphasize, because that is one area most people are not able to figure out very well. So yeah.
Sure, sure, Sandeep. So, I'll tell you guys the way that I used to maintain my error log. So, let's say I got one question wrong, right? So, let's say it's in the quant section, right? So, I used to write down the question. I used to write down what I was thinking when I was giving the exam, and then I used to write down what is that, or where is that I went wrong in my thinking, so that it could be that I don't make a mistake in that question if it comes, in the
Mhm.
next mock. Let's say I made
Right.
a mistake in ticking the wrong units, or stuff like that, right? But it's the thought process that
Right.
counts a lot, because that thought process I'll use for every other question, right?
Right.
So
If
I
you don't
wanted to.
fix it, the
Hmm,
errors will
hmm,
repeat. As you said in the beginning,
right,
never repeat a mistake. So I think this
right,
is more like a recipe for not repeating the mistake.
right, right,
And you
absolutely,
can't figure out your own mindset until you write it down, because you'll forget it what you were thinking. Probably, am I right here
absolutely,
also? Like after a
absolutely,
point,
Sandeep.
you'll forget what you were thinking wrongly. Right.
Absolutely, Sandeep. So just make sure, you guys analyze your mock right after you've attempted one. So that will help a lot. It helped me at least. Yeah. People have seen verbal and con, so they are more comfortable with it. So in order
Mhm.
to get more comfortable with DI, we have to see it more, or practice more. So
Mhm.
that's straight away one point that I would like to say. So practice, give the all the sectional mocks that are there, just
Mhm.
give all of them, right? And you keep on analyzing where you went wrong, and you make sure that
Mhm.
you don't repeat those mistakes, right?
Right.
That's one. And secondly, again, in case you are not, let's say you make a mistake and you are repeating it again and again, right? So there's some logical flaw over there. That's what I believe. Don't treat your mistakes like, okay, ye to silly mistake hai, ye to ho jayega. Nahi, nahi. I don't think so there's anything like that. In case you are making a silly mistake, there is a logical flaw in that,
That
right?
means
Maybe
each
it's
time you think wrongly about it, each time you will think the same wrong way about it. Yes, happens a lot.
right.
Right.
Absolutely, Sandeep. And third point is that don't spend too much time on a question. It will really ruin the section towards the end, because then you will be 4 minutes left and 5 questions you're yet to attempt. You won't be able to do any of them. Just treat it this way. It's trade off between 1 and 4 questions, right? So it's pretty easy to choose. I know, I mean, in the exam it gets very tricky. You've already 2.5 minutes into it. There's sunk cost. You're saying, okay, I'm just there, right? But I think it's better to just skip that, and that's a tough decision to make, but that also comes with practice.
But yeah,
So
if you do
again,
that in mocks very rigorously, I think this will set in as a habit. Otherwise, it won't. I know very
right.
clearly it won't set in as a habit.
Right, Sandeep, absolutely. And people might get lucky, in a mock or two, but then in the official exam, let's say a question comes where you get stuck, right? You need to have that habit of, skipping that question. So I would say or the academics part of it, as in the syllabus part of it, is one section of GMAT. The other very prominent section which people miss is the strategy part of it.
First, and then yeah, let's connect and do keep in touch. All advice is awaiting you, or how you can really approach the next thing. And really, really awesome that you could join in. I'll connect with you soon then. Right.
Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Sandeep.
man.
Looking
Thank
forward
you.
to it.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Thank you. All the best, guys. Thank you.
Yeah.